Hey everyone, this is Dr. Drizzle, and welcome to the National Park Adventure, Crossing America. So thank you everyone for joining us today at the Casa Grande Ruins National Monument in Coolidge, Arizona. And the weather is beautiful today. We are in partnership with the National Park Foundation, and we're so thankful for their collaboration because we get to show up at this amazing place. So ladies, thank you so much for having us here. This is a beautiful background. Ranger Sara, tell us how you got to the parks.
Sure, yeah, thanks so much for being here today. So my journey to the national parks has been quite a journey. I started at Badlands National Park in South Dakota, and I wasn't one of those kids that always knew they wanted to be a park ranger. I didn't even know that national parks really existed when I was growing up. I just knew that I wanted to be outside. So I got to a point where I had gone to school to be a photographer, and I lived in Chicago in the big city, and I realized that really wasn't what I wanted to be doing. So I actually applied to an internship at Badlands National Park and started there as a summer naturalist. So I talked to visitors and I gave programs to the public, and I had an opportunity to talk to the different people that worked in a national park. And from there I got into a park ranger position, got to wear the flat hat. And I've worked at 5 different parks since, and now I'm here at Casa Grande Ruins National Monument, and my job is as an interpretive park ranger, which means that I talk to people, and I'm also the education coordinator. So I get to talk to students on a daily basis and give programs and field trips and help students connect to this amazing site.
What a great journey. And tell us real quickly, after Badlands, where did you go?
Sure, yeah, so I started at Badlands National Park. And then I went to Walnut Canyon National Monument, which is in northern Arizona, so about 4 hours north of here. And from there I went to Joshua Tree National Park, so another desert park. And then from there I went to Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, which is in northern Wisconsin. So I went from extreme heat to extreme cold, and then from there I missed the desert, so I came out here to Casa Grande Ruins National Monument, which is in the Sonoran Desert.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Now, Ranger Andrea, your journey to the parks is a little different, so tell us about that.
So when I went to school, I was studying history with an emphasis on education because the whole goal was to be a teacher. And then life kind of got in the way, and I got married and had kids and decided I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom.
Okay.
So I stayed home with my kids while they were little, fast forward about 12, 13 years, and they got older, and I saw that there was a position open for Western National Parks Association, which is the association that's here that runs the bookstore in the park, and I got a job working there. And doing that, I was able to help do school programs. I was talking to visitors. I was even able to write a program. And then in doing all that, I realized that I wanted to be a park ranger. And so when the opportunity came up here at the ruins for me to become a park ranger, I jumped on it and I took it. So now that I'm here, I get to talk to visitors, I get to do the school programs with Sara, and just got to work on a bunch of amazing things here at the ruins.
I love that the National Park offers so many opportunities for journeys into the national parks, which is really encouraging for our students because, and we'll talk a little bit about this at the end, they really love these outings, and some of them are really interested in coming and working here later on in life, but we'll get to that. There is something amazing behind us, and I wish we were turned the other way so I could see it, but then the kids couldn't see it. Tell us about Casa Grande Ruins National Monument. Who wants to start?
I can go ahead and start.
All right.
Yeah. So right behind us is the Great House, which is the Casa Grande. So Casa Grande is Spanish for Great House. And this is what the main thing that we're protecting here at this site. But our history goes pretty far back. We became the first prehistoric and cultural reserve in 1892 So one of the first places that was set aside to be protected by the federal government to protect cultural history and the Great House and the stories of the ancestral Sonoran Desert people who lived right here in this community about 800, 900 years ago. And this building is about 700 years old. And it's the only one left of its kind from what we call the Hohokam culture. So this is a time period, this is a group of people that were living in the Sonoran Desert, and they were farmers, and they were engineers, they were canal builders, they were artists, and they built this thriving community right here in this really harsh environment. So that's what we're protecting here. And what's really neat about this site is we're the only site within the National Park Service that is dedicated to protecting, preserving, and interpreting the Hohokam culture and the ancestral Sonoran Desert people who called this place home.
Which brings us to something that we're really passionate about, is telling those stories. So if those stories weren't protected, years down the road, people would forget.
Yeah.
They wouldn't know. What year did this park become part of the National Park Service?
Great question. So we became a part of the National Park Service on August 3rd, 1918.
Okay,
Yeah.
long time ago, right?
Yeah.
So one of our sort of original ones, and very interesting to know that in the 1800s, though, that's when it started becoming part of the preservation. So that takes you back to John Muir days, right? And this whole idea of making sure that we're taking care of our lands and telling stories. Andrea, we were talking just a few minutes ago before we rolled the camera about the buildings, the structures here. And I was thinking, oh, you built some beautiful little houses for your people, but there's stories behind the structures. Tell us a little bit about the one that we'll show in just a few minutes to our kids.
So there's other buildings here on the site, not just the ruins, and they used to be residences back in the early 1900s. They were built in 1932 by the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corp, during the Great Depression era. So they came in and they helped plant some of the plants that were here in the park. They helped build some of the buildings here in the park, and they even built our visitor center.
Nice. And you said that a custodian was one of the first ones that sort of worked here. Is that a story you can tell us?
The first live-in custodian here in the park, his name was Frank the Boss Peakley. And when he first came here, he came to Arizona about 1901, and then he ended up being able to be the first live-in custodian, and that was before it was even protected by the federal government. And he lived here on site in a tent.
Now,
and
how did he know how to take care of this place?
He didn't. He didn't know anything about the cultures here. So when he came here, he was learning as he was going. So they came, in the early days, they came and excavated the place, and he got to help the archaeologists help excavate it. And so he just learned as he went along, and he spent his entire NPS career here at Casa Grande National Monument.
I love the idea, again, that people come here to work, but they learn while they're here. So you talked about the ancestral Sonoran Desert people. Can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Yeah, so the ancestral Sonoran Desert people are the people that were living here on this site, what we call the Casa Grande community. So they built the Great House, they built the other ruins. We call them ruins, but they would have been residential structures that were made out of caliche, which is a desert cement right below the surface of the desert. And they were really masters of the desert. So they were able to start out as hunters and gatherers, collecting the native plants and hunting the animals here. But they lived along the river. So just about a mile north of us is the Gila River. And we need water to survive, right? So they wouldn't have been able to survive in this environment without that water source. So they initially lived in communities along the river, and they had farms. But as their farms expanded, they needed to figure out a way to get the water from the river to their farm fields. So they started to dig irrigation canals. And they built the most extensive irrigation canal systems in North America. Miles and miles, about 500 miles of these irrigation canals. And they didn't have the tools that we have today. They didn't have cars, of course. They didn't have even horses. They used digging sticks and stone hoes and the power of their bodies and their minds. So they were engineers. And they made these enormous canals so big you could drive a car all the way through them.
Wow.
And they were moving water. So that water, the movement of that water and the control of the water allowed them to have farm fields where they planted corn, beans, and squash and cotton, and they could live here year round. And so that's something that's unique to this culture. Archaeologists call them the Hohokam culture. They were sedentary. Once they figured out how to move that water and have the year-round farming, they could stay here. And so that was pretty incredible. They also were artists, so they made beautiful pottery and jewelry, and that tells us that they weren't just getting by, they were thriving here. So they built this incredible community right here in the desert, and that's where we're standing right now.
It feels kind of sacred here. Like many stories, I'm sure, were told here and came to life here. And now we can come back and learn about those stories, even just standing here. Now, this is a pretty great house behind us, Ranger Andrea. Who would have lived here? Like, would this have been one family with 2 kids? Or tell us a little bit more about this great house.
So to be honest, we don't know what the great house was used for. I mean, there's a lot of speculation on what it was used for. It's a 4-story structure, and inside the building itself there was 11 different rooms, and nobody knows what those 11 different rooms were for. There's been speculation that it's been storage. There's speculation as far as like a chief type person or maybe a high priest, but we don't know for sure because they didn't leave behind any written language. So your guess is as good as mine. Maybe it was all those things at one point. We just don't know what the building was for.
I want to sort of imagine that it was a gathering place, like with all these artists and all these. I guess family was very important to them because they stayed together in these communities, if you will. So since we don't know, I'm just going to add my speculation that it might have been a gathering place. What was your speculations?
Yeah, there are lots of different speculations, some that Andrea just stated. It is the tallest building on the landscape. This is the tallest building. It's 4 stories high. You could imagine if you came to that very top level and looked out, you could see your farm fields, you could see your canals. So there's some idea that maybe it was used as an administrative center to make sure things were functioning properly with the workers in the field. You could get that bird's eye view. Some people also think that maybe it was used to look at the stars.
Oh, that's beautiful.
At night, look up, you could watch the stars. There are different holes within the Great House that were intentionally built. One of them lines up with the summer solstice, the longest day of the year in June, and another hole lines up with what we call a lunar event that happens about every 18 and a half years, and the moonlight will shine through. There's also equinox holes for the summer and the fall equinox. So there was a lot of thought put into this building. They really needed to know what they were doing. Imagine having that exact height for that sun to come through that hole. So all these ideas might have been what it was used for, but we do know that it was very important, and they put a lot of time and effort into building it.
And again, tell me, how many years ago?
About 700 years ago. So they think the Great House was built around 1350 CE.
Which, again, very interesting because those are things that people now go to school to learn about the equinox and the way the stars aligned. These people knew. They used what they had around them, the nature around them, to make their home and to make things work. Now let's go back to the crops again, because a lot of our kids are from places where their food comes from the grocery store, right? So here they lived off the land.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about the crops.
So for the crops here, they did beans. So they did like a temporary bean. They did corn, and they did squash. For those 3 things, typically they were called 3 sisters farming because the 3 were farmed together. There's no evidence that it was done here, but in other cultures around the area, in little other communities, that's the kind of farming that they did here. The other crop that they farmed here was also cotton.
Okay.
And even now, we still farm cotton around the area. So if you were about to go around the area, nothing's changed. It's still a farming community here. And we still grow the same type of things here. If you go up the road 9 miles here, there's a farm up there, and they do temporary bean farming, just like their ancestors did here.
So many interesting things I want to think about. So we are in Arizona, and when the kids are watching this, we're filming this in February of 2022. and it's beautiful. We just left North Carolina where it was very cold and we've had, you know, snow and sleet. So what is the temperature normally around here?
Well, this is pretty normal for this time of year. I think the high today is supposed to be in the low 80s, which is warmer than last week. Last week our highs were in the low 70s, which for us, we don't have very thick skin anymore because we live in this environment. So if it gets below 70, everyone's pretty cold. But wintertime can be in the 70s, 60s, 50s. Lows at night can get to freezing. We had some hard freezes the last month or so. So wintertime is really like the time to visit here. We do get rain in the wintertime. And then as we move into spring, the temperature starts to rise around April. And summertime, it can be extremely hot. I mean, we can have temperatures of 115 degrees, you know, hot sun. And it's really those days for myself, then I come out here and I imagine these people didn't have air conditioning, you know, they didn't have all the modern conveniences that we had. Yet they were able to survive here. And it just makes me kind of reflect on what do we really need in our everyday lives. But if you were to go inside the Great House, you could feel the temperature difference. You know, in the shade, it would have been a lot cooler. So really, you know, more mild, sunny days in the winter, summertime hot, but then we do, if we're lucky, get monsoon weather, late summer into early fall. So we get afternoon thunderstorms that will come through and can really cool off the day.
So this was a great place for them to choose because it did have the areas for them to plant their crops. It was not going to be harsh in the winter time. So I think that's going to lead us into our engineering and STEM challenge for our students. So we taught kids about how the ancestral Sonoran Desert people, am I saying that correctly? I want to make sure I'm respectful there. Were able to create this amazing community just from the land and doing it using their heads and their brawn too. I'm assuming there were some really strong people that were having to dig and move. So we want to encourage you to plan your own community. Now, I don't want you to think high tech right now. I want you to think of a place where you could plan a community and really use what you find in the area. Use the resources that you find to create your housing, to think about how your area would get their food. And remember that Ranger Sara talked about the irrigation. So wherever you're planning for your community, where are you going to get that water? How are you going to irrigate so that you can have this amazing farms, that you can plant cotton or whatever would be suitable to the environment that you're creating your community planning in? Girls, I think this could be pretty exciting because community planning is a great career for someone to have. And I've also read that there are planners in the national parks that all they do is sit and plan for new things that are being built in the park to tell the story. So we're going to ask you to connect this to a couple of goals. One, I want you to look at goal number 11, which is sustainable communities and cities. Let's look at goal 9 for industry, infrastructure, and innovation because we want you to be innovative. This structure behind me has astronomical features built into it. How can you make that part of the buildings or community you're planning? And then we're going to add another one if you girls are okay. Goal 6 is clean water. So as they're thinking about the irrigation of the water and how they're going to move water from one place to the other, and extra points if you create your community in an area where you would really have to do some irrigation and bring the water naturally to your community. And so we're going to connect it to goal 6. We want you to reach out to us as always on Twitter at Dacia92, but we're also going to be tagging the Casa Grande Ruins National Monument so you can see those taglines running across the bottom of the screen because they're going to be interested in your ideas. They're going to be able to share it with the park and maybe even share it with the community about how students around the country are learning from this place. So not only learning about the community planning and irrigation, but just the people and the sense of family and the things that happened here. Are there any stories, short stories of people that you know that were from this era? Are there any stories, or are they more just inferencing from the ruins?
The stories that would be connected to the people that lived here, the ancestral Sonoran Desert people, there are 6 associated tribes to this site that their ancestry comes to this site. And all their stories, I mean, they vary from one another, but they're all traditionally associated. But to me, that's their stories to tell. That's not a story for me to tell. My story to tell is the story of the Great House,
Yeah.
and the story of the ruins and the people that were here. But as far as their ancestors are concerned, I like to leave those stories to them because that's for them to tell.
I love that. I think that's special and very respectful. So another thing I want to ask you students is to research. Find out the stories from here. Learn from what you are hearing about the stories from here and all the other parks in the country. And remember that as part of our journey together, we want you to write down your stories, because if there's no one writing down these stories, then in 40, 50 years, no one's going to remember those stories. Kind of point there. We just want to make sure that we tell the stories that we need to tell, we respect and honor the stories that are being told, and then we start writing down our own stories. Well, Rangers Andrea and Sara, there's kids out here watching, thousands of kids, and they're going to want your jobs in the future. I'm just telling you, they like the uniforms, they want the hats. So I'm going to ask you, we'll start with Andrea. If you can just look in the camera and tell the kids some things they could start doing while they're still in school.
I would think the biggest thing would be if you really want to work at like a historical site, a cultural site, study history. Science will always get you a long way. History, sciences, Englishes, you would be surprised what you can study in school that will always tie back into the national park. And like Sara said, she studied photography. So you would be surprised. And just research the park. I mean, you might have a dream park. Everyone has a dream park. And just look at the types of jobs there are for the Park Service.
Great information. And I love that you almost have a passion thing going on there. Find something that's interested to you. What about you?
Yeah, so my advice, if you're interested in working for the National Park Service or just learning more about what can you even do in a national park as a park ranger, is to reach out to a park that you're interested in. You know, you can email a park, you can call a park, and just ask, what kind of jobs are there? Because there are so many different types of jobs. So Andrea and I are education or interpretive park rangers, where we're working with the public, where we're working with kids just like you. But we have archaeologists, we have scientists that study the past, human history. We have paleontologists, scientists that study fossils and animal life from long ago. We have people that work in law enforcement, so they're almost like our park police. We have people that work on computers. We have IT specialists. So you can imagine there are so many different types of jobs that you can have if you're passionate about the national parks, history, nature. You might find an interest that could fit right in with something that you want to do. So I would recommend that you reach out to the parks, talk to park rangers, come to national parks if you have one close to you. But I can guarantee you that if we got an email from a student that said, what jobs are there? I'm interested in working for a park, we would jump all over responding to that and having communication with you so that you can know, because sometimes people don't even know jobs like this exist. That's how it was for me. So I'd love to talk to students about how you can work for the National Park Service and how you can help us fulfill our mission of protecting these places.
Well, we also talk about how our passion, if it intersects our purpose, there's where your job is. Yeah. That's what your career is for the rest of your life. And if you can imagine, students, we've not even scratched the surface, no pun intended, of this place. There are so many more things for you to dive into and research. So we're going to encourage you and your teachers to do that. Learn as much as you can about Casa Grande Ruins National Monument, and then begin your engineering challenge. And then part 3, reach back out to these ladies who are going to be so excited to share your stories. Thank you so much to the National Park Foundation for allowing us to come here today to the Casa Grande Ruins National Monument in Coolidge, Arizona. We're very thankful for their partnership, that we're being able to collaborate with them and with these rangers today to get this story out to you. Again, thank you for joining us, Rangers Sara and Rangers Andrea, and from Dr. Drizzle, we are out of here.